So today we're going to be throwing a cylinder, which is the most important form to learn as a beginning potter because it can turn into everything else. We can make a cylinder and then shape it into a vase, a bowl, a mug, a jar, a teapot, any of those things. So cylinders may not be the easiest, but it is very important that you learn them first. So first off, I've got about, pound and a half of clay, pound and a half. I've got a bat, and I do want to talk about our bats. There are several different types. Some fit just on the screw, some fit on top of the screw. This one is dusty and dirty, but if you notice, there's not necessarily clay chunks on it. Whereas a bat like this would not be one to use. You would have to clean this one because otherwise your clay wouldn't stick because of this little clay disc. See how it just falls off? And now I've got dry clay stuck in my ball of clay, which I did not necessarily want, and I've got to now pick out. Okay, so don't do that. If you have one that looks like this, all you want to do is wet clean it, as we've talked about. So put some water on. You can take a rib or a putty knife and then scrape that off. Okay, and if I were to use this bat, I would also want to let it get a little bit dry. Otherwise, this clay is not going to want to stick very well. So you kind of got to dry off your bat so that the clay will want to stick. So I've got my clay stuck. I slammed it on there pretty good, so much so that this camera is now shaking. I'm going to grab several tools. I need a wooden rib, a wooden stick. I like this big one. Okay, there's several different shapes and sizes of wooden stick. That's the one you want. I've got a needle tool. I've got a sponge and my bucket of water that is filled about halfway. So, and I've been doing several videos today, so that's why my wheel is already dirty. Your wheel should be clean when you start. If not, tell the teacher because the person before you did not clean up after themselves. Okay, one other tool you will need is a wire tool, but you do not want to ever leave this in here, okay? And really, there's only a few of these out at a time, so share with a neighbor, but keep this here because otherwise, if this gets stuck in the motor, you're going to ruin that pottery wheel and it's going to be out of commission and it's not going to be fun because I'm not going to be here to fix it for you, potentially. So I've got my clay stuck. I actually checked to make sure it's stuck. And now I'm going to start with our first stage. So there are pictures. Let's see if I can rotate the camera here. There are pictures. Let's see. There they are on the poles in front of you that are going to show you each of these steps that I am talking about. You also have them in your notes to help you because you need lots of picture reference to help you learn how to throw. Lots of stages. So stage number one is what we call coning. So coning is a way of wedging on the wheel. You should have already wedged your clay. You want no issues with your clay. If there is a piece of clay in here that is harder than the rest, pluck it out. All of this clay should be the same level of squishiness. Okay, you can't have clay that's rock hard on one side and super soft on the other. It will not work. Okay, you want your clay to all be the same. Okay, I've wedged it several times. But even though I've wedged it, I am going to do something called coning. So the first step of coning is to create a point in the clay. So there's two ways to do that. Number one is the karate chop method. Okay, so I'm creating a point. The other way you can do it is with the thumb meat of your hand. I can kind of push like this and create a cone shape that way, a point. So once I've got my point made, then my left hand's on the side, my right hand's gonna hold the sponge, and I'm gonna squeeze the clay up together. I can't dig too deep here because otherwise, do you see how it's getting paper thin? This is gonna rip off. So I want to make sure that I am raising it and it's always thinnest at the top here, at the point, okay? So I've coned that up. I'm gonna push it down. My left hand's gonna hold the side of the clay when I push it down. gonna do it again. Create my point. Squeeze the clay up. This time I'm not gonna have that issue that I showed you not to do. Okay. And then again, I have to hold the side when I push it down because otherwise, see how it's all wobbly? So I keep my hand on the side for when I push it down so it doesn't fall and break. I always cone at least twice, okay? If I feel like my clay is super messed up, I'm gonna do it again. There's people on the internet who potentially are watching this video who are like, you should cone 100 times. Well, I teach high school. So we're gonna go with 2. All right. Next up, we're gonna go into centering. Centering is probably the hardest part of learning to throw, that and raising. So what centering is getting the clay perfectly in the middle of the wheel. So right now, when you look at the clay, do you see how it's wobbling? Okay, the faster you go, the more obvious it is, the wobble. If I tried making a pot out of this, it would be all wacky and lopsided. It'd be thick on one side and thin on the other, and nobody would want it. No one would buy it. So we have to get the clay perfectly in the middle, so that it is not bobbing around, okay? So to do that, my right hand has the sponge. It is filled up with water, okay? So if I squeeze it, look, water's coming out. So I've got my right hand on top. My right hand is resting on my knee. My left hand is on the side of the clay, okay? And what's really doing the work here is these parts of my hands. So my right hand is pushing down, my left hand is pushing forward, okay? And there are different ways to center clay, but again, I teach high school, and this is the easiest way to teach a beginning potter, in my opinion. So my right hand's pushing down, my left hand's pushing forward, so that the clay stops wobbling in my hands, okay? Now, you probably can see the clay getting smoother as it goes round and round. I'm using water so my hands don't stick. So I just give a little squeeze when I need some more water. Now, let's say that I almost have it centered. Watch what happens if I let go too fast. Do you see how it's all bumpy now? It's very important that you slowly apply pressure and that you slowly release the pressure and pull your hands off ever so slightly, okay? So you're gonna keep working on centering, okay? Right hand pushing down, left hand pushing forward until the clay stops wobbling in your hands, which takes time to learn how to feel that wobble. One way to look is your pinky finger. So if your pinky finger is pushing around like mine is right now, it's not quite centered. So I'm gonna keep centering. So I'm applying pressure. It is mostly the left hand doing the work here. The top is very easy to get centered, like it's flat. I'm pretty chill there. The hard part is getting this side. So I feel like I've got it now. I'm now gonna bring my finger towards it so you can see here. And my index finger is not really bumping. If it was sitting here getting pushed around, it would not be centered. All right, that is step 1, okay? So coning is something you should always do, especially if your clay is not good. But centering is our official step 1. Step 2 is we're gonna drill a hole, okay? We're gonna use our thumbs to do this. Yes, again, there's other ways to do it, but our thumbs are short and strong. I'm gonna have my elbows resting, and I'm gonna drill straight down. I don't have to do this at the speed of light here. Nice and gentle, I'm slowly pressing down. When I feel that I am close to the bottom, I gently release my hands. Again, I don't rip them out of there. That will knock my project off center. Okay, I wanna check and see how thick my bottom is, because if I drilled too deep, I should start over, because I don't have a bottom. So I'm going to stab down with my needle tool, and then I put my finger where the clay was at, And that right there is how thick my bottom is, which is about 1/4 of an inch, which is the ideal thickness of clay, at least in the high school world. All right, stage 1, centering. Stage 2, drilling. Stage 3 is now going to be opening this clay, widening it so that our hand can fit on the inside. We're making a cylinder. This is a cylinder, this bucket here. It is straight, so I am going to open it straight. My fingers are staying straight. I'm using my other hand to support so my hand doesn't shake. My elbow is rested. When I've opened it up, I gently release the pressure so that it is not let go too fast and becomes off center. Next up, I'm going to smooth out the inside. I don't know if you can see or not from there. Let me try to see how this is all ridged up. We want to fix that, make it smooth. So I'm going to take my sponge. I'm going to smooth that out. Nice and smooth and flat. Okay, sometimes at this stage, your project gets a little off center and a little bit wobbly on the top. So we're gonna do what we call second centering. I can do that kind of like this, but the problem is I now have an inside wall. So what I like to do is just hold my left hand, kind of like a pinch here, my right hand on top, and I'm just kind of holding the clay in place, making sure that if I have any wobbles, I'm just literally pushing the clay back in so it doesn't wobble. Okay, now we are ready to raise. Raising is the other hardest part of learning to throw. So when we raise, I'm basically trapping the clay between my right hand that has the sponge and my left hand that's on the inside. I'm gonna squeeze the clay and move it up nice and slow, okay? So my left hand is all the way down here. I'm using the side of my finger, not my fingertips. They are curved, side of my finger. My right hand's all the way at the bottom, touching the bat here. I'm using my sponge so that A, I have water, and B, that my fingernails don't dig into the project. Okay, you can have 2 hands on the sponge, but you don't want to try to use all 4 fingers to raise, unless you have a ton of clay. I'm also using my left hand to touch my right hand so that they move together in unison, like unison. Okay, so I'm gonna trap the clay between my 2 fingers. I don't have to do this all at once. I'm nice and gradual here. And I'm letting the clay go all the way around before I move up slightly. When I get to the top, I release gently. Okay. I'm gonna go back down now. So my finger's all the way there. I can fit my other fingers in there if I'd like. I'm trapping the clay. Again, if it wasn't for this wall of clay, my 2 pointer fingers would be touching. And I'm moving this clay up nice and slow. All the way around, move up slightly. All the way around, move up slightly. Come to the top, gently release. You don't want your top to be paper thin, but you also don't want it to be heavier, chunkier than the bottom is. It will fall, it'll collapse. Got one more raise. The bottom is where it's always the thickest because that's where you started. So when you're learning to raise, always focus pressing harder probably down here, and as you go up, you might start to press lighter as you feel the walls, okay, and how thin it is. So I'm gonna do one last raise here. I want the walls to feel the same from the bottom to the top. I don't want thin spots, I don't want thick spots. Okay, so that's raising. This is most often where your project will die, and that's okay. Now I'm gonna compress it with a wooden rib that is straight because I'm making a straight thing. So left hand on the inside, right hand on the outside. I'm gonna trap the clay between my 2 hands and move it up nice and slow. I'm gonna trim the lip here at the top. This is another harder stage because you have to have a steady hand. Rest your elbow your arm, I'm gonna just kind of, I'm not squeezing it, I'm just kind of holding it because it's a little wobbly. So I'm gonna hold it and slowly insert this needle, letting it go round and round. I'm just now all the way through. Lift it up. Okay, if you get any on the inside there, just grab that off. I'm gonna take my sponge now. It's kind of sharp where I cut it, so I'm gonna just hold it nice and gentle. Smooth that out. Take my big wooden stick and get this nasty corner off the bottom. Okay. Scraping off that extra clay. Last but not least, I want to get the water out of the inside. If I leave a bunch of water in there, it will just make a hole. I won't have a bottom anymore. I'll have slip if I leave it there overnight. Just make sure my cylinder is nice and straight one more time. And then I'm going to wire this. Pick up my bat, cover it with a trash bag, put it on my shelf. And that's how you make a cylinder.